Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. Your salary is pathetic. She said it with a smirk, swirling her wine like the words were entertainment, not poison. The restaurant was loud, laughter from other tables echoing around us, but somehow the whole room went silent in my head. I stared at her, fork halfway to my mouth, and something inside me shifted. Not anger, not embarrassment, just clarity. Melissa wasn't drunk. She wasn't joking. She wanted me to feel small, right there in front of strangers, as if my paycheck defined me. She leaned back in her chair, proud, waiting for me to defend myself or laugh it off. But I didn't. I just placed my fork down, smiled faintly, and let the silence stretch until she got uncomfortable. That was the night everything changed, though she didn't know it yet. The funny thing is, we weren't struggling. I paid the bills. I covered the mortgage. I even picked up the dinner tab that night, while she complained about the number on the check. What she didn't realize was that money wasn't my weakness. It was hers. And if she wanted to measure a man's worth by his salary, then she was about to live in a world where mine no longer carried her weight. When we got home, she carried on like nothing had happened. She kicked her heels off, scrolled her phone on the couch, and muttered something about brunch plans with her friends. I didn't argue. I didn't remind her she'd just humiliated me over dinner. I didn't even bring it up. I just sat there, watching her laugh at her phone, realizing I'd been giving her the luxury of stability for years while she chipped away at my dignity one remark at a time. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, while she snored softly beside me. My mind wasn't racing with pain, it was calculating. I thought about every subscription she never paid for, every dinner she ordered on my card, every vacation she bragged about on Instagram like she'd earned it. I thought about how she'd never once asked me how long I'd worked overtime to cover the life she flaunted. By dawn, the decision was made. The first move was small. I rerouted part of my paycheck into a separate account. She didn't notice. Why would she? She never checked the balances. She only spent. The second move was even quieter. I canceled a credit card she loved to use, the one with the travel points she bragged about to her friends. A week later, she called the bank, confused. I listened from the kitchen as her voice climbed with frustration, but I said nothing. Then I started coming home later. At first, I told her I was at the gym. Then I stopped offering excuses. She'd ask, half-heartedly, where I'd been, and I'd shrug. I wasn't lying, but I wasn't explaining either. She wanted to measure me by numbers, so I decided to let her feel what it meant when those numbers disappeared from her life. The real shift came when her friend Jenna pulled me aside at a barbecue. "She's been bragging about some promotion you're going to get," Jenna said casually, sipping her drink. I just smiled and told her I wasn't chasing titles anymore. The look on Jenna's face told me she'd repeat that to Melissa. And she did. That night, Melissa's tone changed. Not soft, not apologetic, just nervous. For the first time in years, I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing the lifestyle she built on top of me. And that's when I knew I had her exactly where she never expected to be, standing on her own. The silence became my sharpest weapon. I didn't confront her about the restaurant, didn't throw her words back in her face. Instead, I let her believe she'd won that night, that her mockery had rolled off me. But inside, I was already dismantling the world she lived in. Piece by piece, without warning, without noise. Melissa thrived on control. She loved being the one with the cutting remark, the one who set the stage in every room. For years, I had been her silent backdrop, the provider, the man who never complained while she preened for friends, posted pictures of vacations, and dropped hints about designer purses she didn't buy herself. My mistake wasn't giving her too little. It was giving her too much, too easily. I stopped filling the gas tank in her car. She noticed within 3 days. She walked into the kitchen, keys dangling in her hand, and asked if I'd forgotten. I just shrugged. She blinked, waiting for an explanation, but I gave her nothing. She topped it off herself, for the first time in months, and the look on her face told me she hated every second of it. That was the first crack. At dinner a week later, she ordered takeout like she always did, scrolling her phone while I set the bags on the counter. When she reached for her wallet, I said nothing. I just let the silence sit there until she realized the card she always used was no longer active. She asked what was wrong with it. I said she'd have to call the bank. Then I walked away. No anger, no lecture. just distance. That night, she came to bed later than me, tossing and turning, huffing like a teenager grounded for the first time. She didn't know it yet, but she was starting to taste the independence she once claimed she wanted. Independence isn't brunch with friends or new clothes for Instagram. Independence is bills, deadlines, car repairs, the weight of a life without someone holding it up for you. The following weekend, I stayed out late. No explanations, no texts. When I came home, she was pacing the living room, arms folded. She asked where I'd been. I said I'd been busy. That was all. She wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers, but I gave her nothing. That unsettled her more than any shouting match could. By the end of the second week, her tone shifted again. Her friends weren't hearing her brag about me anymore. They were hearing hesitation. Jenna called me quiet in front of her, and I saw Melissa's jaw tighten. She had built an identity on top of me, and now I was pulling the foundation away brick by brick. The truth was simple. She thought my salary was pathetic. She hadn't realized until now that it was the only thing standing between her and the reality she feared most, paying for everything alone. The first sign of her panic came quietly. She called me at work one afternoon, something she never did unless it was important. Her voice was light, almost forced, as she said she just wanted to hear mine. I let the silence linger before asking if everything was okay. She laughed nervously and said she missed me. I didn't say it back. I ended the call with nothing but stillness, and I knew in that moment she felt it. The distance she once thought she controlled now belonged to me. That evening, I came home later than usual. Melissa was sitting on the couch, hair curled, wearing a silk robe I hadn't seen in over a year. The table was set, candles lit, pasta steaming in bowls. She smiled like it was an ordinary night, like nothing between us had shifted. She gestured for me to sit. I did. I ate. I thanked her. But when she reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine, I pulled my hand back without even looking at her. The silence that followed was louder than any argument we had ever had. Over the next few days, her attempts multiplied. She started texting me during the day, little check-ins she never used to bother with. Hope your morning's going okay. What do you want for dinner? Miss you. I replied with single words. Fine. Doesn't matter. Good. Each answer sliced deeper than a fight ever could. She had built a throne on control, on withholding affection like a weapon, and now I was feeding her the same emptiness she once gave me. I noticed her watching me more closely. When I got dressed for work, her eyes flickered over my shirt, my cologne, the way I carried myself. She asked if I was seeing someone. I said I was just busy. The vagueness unsettled her. She wanted answers, but I gave her nothing. That nothing was heavy enough to crush her confidence. The real shift came late one night. She came to bed in lingerie, the kind she hadn't touched in years. She lay beside me, waiting. I rolled over, turned off the lamp, and fell asleep without a word. In the morning, she wouldn't look at me. Her silence used to be a weapon. Now it was her shield. What Melissa never understood was that silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes silence is the sound of someone stepping out of your orbit, preparing to disappear completely. And for the first time in our marriage, she realized I wasn't fighting to stay. I was already gone in every way that mattered. It started with the smallest ripples. I canceled a couple of subscriptions, services she thought just existed in the background like running water. Netflix, her favorite fashion box, the yoga app she never used but bragged about having. The next night, she called out from the living room that the account wasn't working. I heard the frustration in her voice, but didn't respond. She tried again, louder this time, but I kept reading my book. The silence told her everything. 2 days later, the first bill arrived in her name. The car insurance, one she never even knew, I paid automatically. She came into the kitchen waving it like it was a mistake, asking why it hadn't cleared. I told her it wasn't my problem anymore. Her eyes narrowed, but there was no argument on her lips. She just stood there, stunned, holding a piece of paper that proved her safety net had vanished. That weekend, I left early in the morning and stayed gone until late. When I walked back in, bags of groceries in hand, she was waiting. For the first time in years, she cooked dinner herself. Not for me, just for her. I ate separately, silent, watching her out of the corner of my eye as she tried to pretend she wasn't rattled. The truth was plain in her face. Independence wasn't glamorous when it came with receipts and late fees. Her friends started to notice. At brunch, Jenna posted pictures of mimosas and Melissa in a dress she'd bought on credit. I overheard her on the phone later that night, voice trembling, saying she couldn't go out as often. She blamed me, said I was being difficult, said I was sulking. But the tone was different now, less arrogant, more desperate. Then came the credit card. She swiped it at the salon and called me afterward, her voice sharp, saying it had been declined. I didn't even pick up. I let the voicemail sit until the next morning. When she confronted me in person, demanding to know if I'd shut it off, I told her calmly that I had. She called me petty. I called it fair. She stormed off, but her silence afterward told me she knew exactly what was happening. For the first time since we met, Melissa was standing on ground I didn't reinforce for her. Every expense, every luxury, every careless decision was suddenly hers alone to bear. And as much as she wanted to rage, she couldn't change the truth. She had mocked the very foundation of her comfort, and now she was being forced to live without it. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to explain. All I had to do was let her taste what life without me really cost. Her image began to fracture long before she realized it. Melissa had always been the one who walked into brunches, salons, and family gatherings with stories about how she kept everything together. She played the role of the glamorous wife whose husband was lucky to have her. But without my silent contributions, her script started to collapse. It began at her sister's birthday dinner. Normally, Melissa would pick up the bill with a flourish, acting like money was just a background detail. That night, when the check landed, she froze. Her sister waited, confused, until I quietly covered only my portion and pushed the rest of the bill toward Melissa. She stammered, claiming her card wasn't working, but her sister's raised eyebrow said it all. The whispers started that night. Soon after, her mother called me. She asked if everything was all right, said Melissa had been acting strange. I told her nothing specific, just that I was giving Melissa the independence she always talked about. Her mother sighed, like she already knew what that meant. For years, I had been the steady son-in-law, the quiet strength behind Melissa's showmanship. Now that I had stepped back, her family saw who she really was without the stage lights. At work, she slipped too. She had always bragged to her co-workers about our vacations, about the clothes, about how her husband supported her lifestyle. When she had to decline a trip because she couldn't cover her share, the story spread faster than she could contain it. I heard about it from a mutual friend before she even told me. The version of Melissa she curated online and in person was cracking, and no filter could save her. Her friends began to ask questions. One evening, I overheard her on the phone with Jenna, her voice trembling as she said I had changed. Jenna didn't sound convinced. People had seen the shift already. Melissa wasn't glowing anymore. She was tense, distracted, snapping at small things. The independence she once praised had started to look less like freedom and more like isolation. At home, the mask slipped further. She was drinking more wine at night, scrolling her phone like she could escape into someone else's life. But when she glanced at me, I was calm, detached, and unreadable. That silence terrified her more than any confrontation could. She was starting to realize she wasn't just losing comfort. She was losing the version of herself that only existed because I was there to support it. Melissa once mocked my salary. Now she was carrying every weight she never noticed, stumbling under burdens I'd held for years. And as the cracks spread across her perfect image, she was forced to face the one truth she could never laugh away. Without me, she wasn't built for the life she thought she deserved. The first time she tried to turn the tables, it backfired spectacularly. We had been invited to a small dinner at a neighbor's house, a couple we both knew casually. Melissa walked in wearing a dress she'd clearly bought on credit, her smile plastered on like armor. She laughed too loudly, spoke too quickly, and I knew she was trying to prove something. Halfway through the evening, the conversation shifted to careers. Our host asked how work was going, and Melissa seized her chance. She leaned back in her chair, her voice sweet but cutting, saying, "Well, you know, his salary isn't exactly impressive, but we make it work." She wanted a laugh, a nod of agreement. She wanted me to squirm in front of others. Instead, the room went quiet. The husband glanced at me, uncomfortable. His wife shifted in her seat. Finally, he said, "Funny thing is, stability is worth more than big numbers. My brother makes a fortune, but he's broke every month. Not everyone knows how to build something that lasts." His words weren't meant as an attack, But the timing was perfect. Melissa's smirk faltered. I didn't add a word. I didn't need to. The silence around the table spoke for me. On the way home, she tried to cover it with small talk, but her voice was tight, her hands restless in her lap. She had expected me to react, to argue, to restore her control. But all she got was the sound of the engine and my quiet breathing. She hated it. In the days that followed, her behavior grew erratic. She started spending more, desperate to maintain the illusion of control. New clothes arrived at the door, packages stacked in the hallway. But without my support, the bills piled up just as quickly. One evening, I found her at the kitchen table with her laptop open, staring at numbers she couldn't fix. She closed it quickly when she noticed me watching, but her eyes told the story, panic, sharp and raw. I didn't say a word. I just walked past her, poured myself a glass of water, and left her drowning in silence. She had mocked my salary, treated it like a punchline, but now she was choking on the reality of living without it. The cracks in her mask were no longer private. Friends saw it. Family whispered about it. Strangers at a dinner table sensed it. She was unraveling in public, and I never had to raise my voice. Her fight for my attention began slowly, like she was testing the water. It started with little gestures, things she hadn't done in years. One morning she made coffee, placing a mug in front of me with a hopeful glance. I thanked her and walked out the door without touching it. That small rejection stung more than any argument. Later that week, she cooked a full dinner, something elaborate, with candles set on the table. I ate quietly, complimented nothing, and went upstairs before dessert. The sound of her cleaning the dishes alone echoed through the house, like a confession. By the second week, the desperation was impossible to ignore. She began texting me constantly during the day. At first, it was harmless questions. What did I want for dinner? Did I need anything from the store? Then it shifted, photos of herself, attempts to remind me of a version of her that no longer existed. Each time, I answered with the same cold precision. Fine. No. Busy. My detachment became a mirror, forcing her to feel exactly what I had endured for years. One night, I returned home from the gym later than usual. She was waiting in the living room, dressed in a black dress that clung to her like armor. She had wine poured, music playing softly, everything staged like a scene from the past. She smiled, asking if I wanted to join her. I told her I was tired and went upstairs. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear her moving around the living room, picking up the glasses, turning off the music, each motion slower than the last. The more I pulled away, the harder she reached. She touched my arm in the mornings, searching for warmth that wasn't there. She lingered in doorways, hoping for eye contact I wouldn't give. Her voice, once sharp with mockery, now trembled when she spoke. She had thought control was hers forever, that affection was a currency she could withhold at will. Now she was learning what it felt like to be denied. The irony was brutal. She had laughed at me once, dismissed my worth with a smirk over dinner. Now she was clawing at the silence, begging in her own quiet ways for the attention she used to take for granted. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to punish. All I had to do was remain still, cold, untouchable. And in that stillness, she began to break. The night she finally cracked, it wasn't tears or begging, it was anger. I came home later than usual, calm as always, and found her waiting in the kitchen. The counters were spotless, the table bare, her phone face down like she had staged the entire room for confrontation. She looked at me with eyes that were no longer mocking, but wild. She asked why I was doing this, why I was acting like a stranger in my own house. Her voice shook, rising with every word, until she blurted out that I was punishing her. I didn't flinch. I didn't even sit down. I set my keys on the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and let her words hang in the air. She demanded to know if I was seeing someone else, if that was the reason I was distant. She wanted a fight. She wanted anything that would pull me into her storm so she could feel in control again. But all I gave her was silence. The quiet unnerved her more than shouting ever could. She paced the floor, accusing me of abandoning her, of sabotaging the marriage. She said I was cruel. But every accusation she threw was just an echo of what she had done to me for years. She had made me invisible, reduced me to background noise, mocked me in front of others. Now she was tasting the very medicine she had once administered so easily, and it burned. When her voice finally broke, when the fury slipped into desperation, She said she didn't recognize me anymore. That was the closest thing to honesty I had heard from her in years. Because the man she thought she could humiliate over dinner had disappeared. What stood before her was someone untouchable, unreachable, no longer orbiting her moods or feeding her ego. She tried one last tactic. She said we could fix it, that she was willing to work on things if I just opened up. But the way she said it wasn't love, it was survival. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing the comfort I carried with me. And I let that realization sit with her, heavy and unspoken. That night, I slept soundly. She didn't. I could hear her moving restlessly in bed, tossing, turning, sighing into the darkness. She had once laughed at my salary, treated it like a flaw to mock. Now she was lying awake in the silence, realizing that without it, her life was crumbling faster than she could patch it together. The admission came not with a scream, but a whisper. It was early morning, the sun barely cutting through the blinds, when Melissa sat on the edge of the bed and said she didn't want to lose me. Her voice was low, almost foreign, as if the words had been dragged out of her against her will. For the first time in years, she wasn't mocking or commanding. She was afraid. I stayed silent, staring at the ceiling, letting her words linger in the air like smoke. She waited for me to answer, to reach for her, to reassure her that everything was fine. But nothing came. The silence hollowed her out, and I saw it. The flicker of realization that she wasn't pleading with the same man she once belittled. She was pleading with someone colder, stronger, someone who had already walked away inside. That day she tried harder than ever. She texted me a dozen times, not the clipped messages she once threw my way, but long paragraphs filled with apologies, promises, and half-baked declarations of love. I read them all, then set my phone down without responding. By the evening, she was waiting at the door when I came home, dressed up, makeup carefully done, her eyes searching mine for even the smallest crack. She asked if we could go out together, just the two of us, like we used to. I told her I had other plans. Her face fell, but she covered it quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She said she'd wait up for me. I came home hours later, and she was still sitting on the couch, wine glass empty, mascara smudged. She looked at me like she wanted to scream, but instead she just asked if I still loved her. I didn't answer. I walked past her and upstairs, leaving her alone in the silence she had created long ago. It was brutal, but it was necessary. For years, I had begged for scraps of affection, lived on the edge of her indifference, convinced myself that love was still buried under her mockery. Now the roles had reversed. She was begging, and I was already gone. She was finally seeing the cost of her arrogance, and it terrified her. Melissa once mocked my salary, reduced my worth to a number at dinner. Now she was clinging to me like the last lifeline she had left, realizing too late that the man she thought she could belittle had become untouchable. The end didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors or dramatic ultimatums. It came in the same way my silence had worked all along: quiet, deliberate, irreversible. One morning, I packed a small suitcase, the essentials I actually cared about, and placed it by the door before leaving for work. Melissa was still asleep upstairs, unaware that her clock was running out. That day, I closed the joint account permanently. I signed the final papers my lawyer had prepared weeks earlier. Every loose thread she once pulled to keep me tethered was cut. By the time I drove home that evening, I knew it was the last time I'd walk through that door as her husband. Melissa was waiting in the living room, dressed like she'd been rehearsing some kind of redemption. Her hair was done, makeup carefully applied, the same silk robe she wore on our honeymoon wrapped tightly around her. She looked at me with eyes full of panic disguised as warmth. She said she had been thinking, that she was ready to change, ready to make us work again if I would just give her one more chance. I set the envelope on the coffee table between us. Her smile faltered as she picked it up, her fingers trembling when she saw the word divorce stamped across the top. She asked if this was some kind of joke, if I had really gone this far. I told her calmly that I had. Her breath caught, and for the first time since the night she mocked me over dinner, she had no words. She tried to laugh it off, tried to reach for me, tried to remind me of memories we once shared. But I wasn't moved. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even bitter. I was simply finished. She had spent years mistaking my patience for weakness, my loyalty for complacency, my silence for defeat. What she never understood was that silence can also mean preparation. And I had prepared for this moment down to the last detail. When I walked upstairs to collect my suitcase, she followed, her voice shaking, asking what she was supposed to do without me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because deep down, she already knew. She had laughed at my income once, made me the punchline in front of strangers. Now she was left with the wreckage of a life she couldn't hold together on her own. I left the house without looking back. No anger, no tears, no final argument. Just a clean break. She was alone in the silence she had built, and I was free. And the last thing I thought as I closed the door behind me was simple. She mocked the man who carried her world, and now she would carry the weight of it all by herself. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.